Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Art of Equine Alchemy podcast. This is Ellie O'Brien. Thank you
Kia
for hanging out
ora.
with us. Thank you. Thank you for hanging out. She's coming to us from New Zealand, and that's exciting. It took us a minute to get this set up, but here we are.
Thank you so much for having me on, Amber. I am super excited to be chatting with you. And yeah, we were just saying it's hot there, but I am freezing here in Aotearoa in our winter.
Yeah, so do you want to introduce yourself a little bit? Or I know you wanted to start out with something special that kind of probably embodies who you are anyways.
Yeah, let's start there. So I'll begin with karakia, which is kind of like a prayer. Kara meaning vibrations, and ki is kind of to send out. So to you, to our listeners, to our atua, which are the deities. I'll begin. Tuia ki te rangi, tuia ki te whenua, tuia ki te here tangata. Tau mai te mauri o te manawa ora, hei arahi i a tātou, hui te ora, hui te marama, haumie, huie, tai ki e. So, connect us to the heavens, connect us to the land, connect us to one another. Let the spirit of life come to guide us, bringing health and wellness and understanding to our conversation. Let's bind us together, connect us together. Let that be our commitment.
Oh,
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
So,
So,
no, go ahead. There's a delay.
uh, who am I? Ko wai who am I? Ko Ellie tōku ingoa. Ko Tiarawa tōku maunga, ko te awa o te atua tōku awa, ko Ngāti Rangitihi tōku iwi, ko Rangitihi me Tiunga tōku tangata, ko Tiarawa tōku waka, I um, and that's talking about where I come from. So when we talk about who we are, we acknowledge our whakapapa, our ancestry. So I began with acknowledging our mountain, which is Tarawera, Ruawahia. And then I spoke about our awa, our river, which is Te Awa o Te Atua, meaning the river of the gods. Then I spoke about our iwi, which is kind of like our tribe, and the person who I guess was the chief of the tribe, Ngāti Rangitihi and Rangitihi, the chief. And then I spoke about our waka, Tiarawa, which was the canoe that came from Hawaii to Aotearoa. So that is who I am.
You know what is so amazing about that is that people will go, and people, as in also me, you go to what you do as if that is who you are. And I think that's why that question always feels so messy to me, even though I continue to ask it. And we even said before we started, I was like, here's this question. And so I
Mm.
love the fact that, like, who am I? I'm a collection of the land that I live on, my ancestors, their experiences, my experiences. Like that is who I am. It is not what I do is not who I am. So now I'm forever, ever, never going to answer that question the same ever again. Thank you. I feel so free in the first 5 minutes of our conversation.
Oh, beautiful. Yes, and this question, ko wai o, who am I? A few years ago, I could not answer that question because, like you said, like, who am I? I'm a collection of all these things, but none of that seems to ground me in who I truly am. And when I went on this journey of discovering who I am, because of course, here in Aotearoa, because of colonization, many of us Māori are disconnected from who we are. And I think that's probably something that's felt throughout the entire world.
Right.
Um, and so discovering our language, my whakapapa, the ancestry, yeah, like we talked about the connection to the land, the water, and when we say ko wai o, why means water. So
Mm,
we are made up of water. We come from the water. We're birthed out through water. So it's just this beautiful, like full circle. And for me, that's been so much of my healing uh, is learning about who I am, and it's given me this sense of belonging that I didn't have before.
mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's amazing. Is there something that you can think of that is representing like the fire, like the thing that maybe started this all? Like we all have those moments where our healing journey is sparked. And I know we can have many of them, but is there one that was the most significant that stands out for you?
Yeah, I think there's two that I'll talk about. And the first one was back in 2012. And it was after I had broken my neck. I didn't think I was going to ride again. And when I came back to it a year later, after crying almost daily, missing horses, I had a horse come into my life who had been traumatized. And I did everything I had in my toolbox to try and help this horse. And one of her big things was she had been ear twitched, and to get a bridle on her, I had to take like every single part apart and like sneak it up onto her. And I thought that I had been making progress, and I was kind of like, yes, we're getting there. It's all coming together. And then this one day I went to put it on her, and she just like freaked out again. And in that moment, like, oh, I'm so ashamed to say it now, but like I punched her in the neck, and in that moment, like I just felt so awful because I was like, oh, that's not who I am. And I looked at her, and I swear she had tears in her eyes, and like so dramatic. I like dropped to my knees, and I like start sobbing, and I'm like, please show me another way of doing this, because I had been brought up through the pony club system. Not that there's everything wrong about it, but we aren't taught those foundational pieces of connection and understanding how horses think and learn and all that sort of stuff. So that moment was my defining moment of how things changed. And all of a sudden, like within weeks, things started falling into place. I had an opportunity come up to go and take this mare to learn from Dr. Andrew McLean. And then there I met other horsemanship people, and yeah, it was just a snowball effect of being introduced to this whole different way of working with horses. And a few months later, I came across the Buck Brannaman documentary, and I was like, wow, like this is so different to anything I've seen. And then I think I found out that the following weekend he was going to be here in Aotearoa on his biannual trip, just an hour from where I lived. So I was like, well, if that's not a sign, then I don't know what is. Um, yeah, so it was pretty cool. So that was the beginning of my journey. Then fast forward to um 2019, I listened to a podcast where they were talking about shamanism, and I was like, wow, like, what is this? I want to learn more about this. And at the time, I thought, well, before I learn about another culture's healing modalities, I need to know about my own culture. And why don't I know about my own culture? And at the time, I was in a really unhealthy environment. I was in a domestic violence violence relationship. And when I searched my question, I couldn't find an answer. Then fast forward again about 10 months, I was now out of that environment in a healthy, loving environment. And I reconnected with an old friend of mine. And I was telling him about this question of like, why don't I know anything about the healing modalities of our culture? And he said to me, well, that's because of the Tohunga Suppression Act. So a tohunga is kind of like a healer, I guess here in Māori culture. And so in the 1800s, there was a suppression, a law created to stop our healers from practicing. And so it was not talked about for a very long time and not practiced. It was in places, but it was very secret. And so, again, like that question and finding out that answer, it broke my heart to hear that. And I started to have these drop-ins of like, well, that makes sense as to why I'm so disconnected. And at the time, I thought that I was the only one that was disconnected from my culture. And later to find out that it's a pretty widespread thing. Um, and so it was so beautiful because that piece. I think that my entire life I had been searching for something external. Like whether it was self-help things, whether it was success, whether it was relationships, achieving goals. And as I went down this journey about like learning who I was and my culture, um, I started to fall in love with that piece. And I was like, oh my gosh, this has been the thing that I've been searching for my whole life. And it's me. Um, so that was the second big change. And since I've begun that journey, although it's not horses, it's the me piece, which and then in turn then has made such a big shift in the way I show up with my horses and the people that I work with as well.
Yeah. So how does that integrate? I feel like I met you. Well, I mean, we've never actually met in person, but I feel like we've known each other and been on each other's podcasts over the years for like quite some time. And
Yeah.
watching on social media as if that is like you're watching someone's life TV show. It's so strange. Um,
Yeah.
and watching the progression and watching the shifts, how does it change? How does it integrate into like you working with the horses? Like what is different about it now than it was back then?
I think learning about our culture, the Māori culture, has given me a totally different worldview. Um, And that worldview, I heard somebody talk about it recently. So our language is very poetic, and it's one of like feeling and of the body and of the environment. So it's this great like connection to everything. And so when I come at life through that lens, it's so much easier to flow in that. So then when I show up to my horses, I'm looking at everything like, what is the moon doing today? What is the wind doing today? The sun, the sea, what is the sea doing? So these are all of our atua, our gods, the sun, the wind, the earth, the sky, and everything in between. So there's an acknowledgement of all of those pieces, and then of course the animal as well. So um, viewing animals as something that I guess are above us, which I think has been really different to in the past, like especially coming from a more Western world approach to horses. Like they've been such a tool. And growing up in a competition world, it's like I'm going to compete at the show on my horse that belongs to me, sort of thing, rather than how can I care for this animal? Like looking up to them and thinking about all parts of them instead of taking from them.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel like they play a significant role in like the spiritual growth side of things, the personal growth side of things? Like, what does that look like to you if it does?
Um, yeah, so rongoa here is that's our healing. And so I see horses as our healers, because they've got no am I allowed to say swear words?
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Okay, they've got no bullshit in the way. Like they just hear and being. So I think if we can connect into how they be, there's so much to learn. Um, and one of the questions that I ask that we ask is kei te pēhea koe? So like, how are you? And so this is a question that I ask the horses a lot now
Mm,
is like, how are you? No, but like, really, how are you? And listening to that answer. And I think when I listen to that answer, it gives me a indication of how I can show up better for them. Um, and they just are spiritual, hey. They've got they've got that connection to everything that I think we have as well, but through society we've lost that a little.
right. Yeah. And for you and integrating your culture and everything that you're learning now, and then coming in and working with the horses, like I know that one of the other things that I think all of the presenters have been kind of rolling around, like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do for this? Like, what does it look like? Like, who do we want to work with? Like, do you have any idea? Do you have a vision of what that looks and feels like for you? Like, what is your main intention that you want to be able to share with people while you're here and at the event itself?
I think I would love to share some of my culture. Um, and I think my intention is kind of going back to that question that in the beginning we were like, oh my God, that question. But the core why oh, who am I? Because if we can leave a little bit, feeling a little bit more connected to ourselves, and have a little bit more belonging and sense of identity, then that's a really cool place to begin.
Yeah.
And how that looks.
Mm.
I think that's the part where uh that's the spiritual part, eh? And I think
Mhm.
that's the part that sometimes the horses just guide us to that place
Right.
and they bring forth what we're needing in that moment.
Yeah, I think the beauty of all of the people that are presenting and involved and supporting is that we know that what's running through the entire theme is that connection piece, and why it was so important for me to have the human side of it so intertwined is because I feel like that is what people are craving. They're craving that connection with others, but also most people don't know how to answer, who are you? What do you do? Like we talked about in the beginning, is like what you go to. And if you are what you do, that's like such an interesting thing. Like the moment you started talking at the beginning of this, I was like, hold on, my entire perception is now shifting in this moment. So I think bringing
Oh,
that bringing that element into alchemy, which is like those steps that people will have gone through, the
yeah.
fire, like what is the thing that like has started and sparked your journey down that, like, am I, who am I? And am I the stories? Am I my experiences? Am I, what I do? Am I
Mhm.
what people have told me I am? And that fire doing the work of burning away all of the false beliefs that you have about yourself and how things really are, and sifting through the ashes and being like, no, this is actually who I am, though. Here, all the other bullshit is gone. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and I love that that was what was started out as, because that is such a it's such a thing everybody should be actually asking themselves from that lens, I think.
Mm. Well, it's interesting because um, this past weekend, at the moment, I'm studying it's called the He Puawai certificate. So in Te Reo Pākehā in English, that's adult and tertiary teacher training. And so part of that is going to a marae, um, and it's called a noho. So noho means to sit or stay. So and a marae is a I'm like, oh my gosh, how do I translate this into English? A marae is like a meeting house, and oh my gosh, they're beautiful. You have to come to Aotearoa to experience it. So, it's a meeting house that are made for your tribe, and so you all come together in these meeting houses, and oh, they're so beautiful. They have like the wood carvings on them, like the carvings tell the stories of like from creation to like the journey, and it's just like the connection from the earth to the stars, and oh, it's amazing. So anyway, when you go to the marae, the very first thing that you do is it's called whakawhanaungatanga. So this is where like we introduce ourselves to one another, and you say your pepeha, which is what I said before, uh, saying where you come from, who you are. And because in that moment where you create that whakawhanaungatanga is where you create connection. And so now like we might come from different places, but we may have an ancestor that comes from the same place, or maybe they've traveled through your river before, or been to your land. And so now we have that connection that we can build our relationship on. And so it's such an important piece. And it's like I said, it's the very first thing that we do in our culture. And then we come together and you press noses together. And so that comes back to like the sharing of breath, the sharing of life. And then we have that connection. And then we can go out and talk and eat food together and grow things together. So yeah, just it's the beginning piece, hey?
Yeah, it's so interesting you guys touch noses. It's like horses.
Yeah, yeah.
No wonder you like that part.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's right. I got tagged in a reel this morning from a friend of mine of a woman sitting with her horse, and they're like breathing into each other's. But it is, and it feels so beautiful, eh, when you do that with your horse. So I'm like, yeah, same thing.
Yeah. So because I know people are going to ask, and I am so curious. I know that I've watched your journey on social media, Ellie's movie, and
Oh,
I witnessed like a transformation from, when I first met you and till now. And over the last year, you went through you went on a ride, did you not? A ride that where your ancestors had traveled? That was like not that long ago, right?
yeah, so that was just in November last year, so 2023.
Hmm.
And that was a part of my journey as well. I began thinking like, okay, I want to learn how to speak our language. And then I was like, oh wow, that's a lifetime journey. Because it's not just learning the language, there's like layers of trauma within that as well. Um, But the next thing I thought, well, I want to learn our whakapapa. I want to learn our who our ancestors are, not just the names written on the paper, because that's great, but it's when we hear their stories is when that creates more meaning to who am I as
Mm-hmm.
well. And so one of the things I learned about was my great great grandfather. Um, his name was Tiki Tero Paraha Parker, and his family lived at the base of Tarawera Maunga that I talked about earlier in my pepeha. And so in 1886, so this is all my learning over the last couple of years. In 1886, Tarawera Maunga erupted and it was devastating. It wiped out um, many of the tribes, the land all around. And Tiki, he was just 13 at the time, and his family lived like right below the mountain. And so 2 days before the mountain erupted, his mother had apparently told him to ride away on his horse. And he was the eldest boy of, I think, four children. Um, and so, of course, he survived. He survived the
Mm-hmm.
eruption while the rest of them were lost. Um, and yeah, so like learning that, I was just like, oh, like just it hits me. But at the same time, I had this thought of like, I wonder if I can ride his pathway,
Mm-hmm.
the path that he took.
Mm-hmm.
And so because of that question, now this takes me on this whole new journey of like, okay, well, how now I need to work backwards from that thought. How can I achieve that? Well, I need to connect to the people from our iwi, from our tribe. I need to go back to, I need to go to our marae, which I had never been to in my entire life. So yeah, so now I'm having conversations with these people. I'm going to the land. I'm going to where the eruption happened. I'm going out on the lake where, our tupuna, our ancestors are still buried beneath there. And just having these like massive healing moments and spiritual moments and um, layers of like awe and grieving as well. Yeah, even doing like I did a breathwork journey and I'm like just bawling my eyes out, like doing like this really deep, like guttural howling type of thing. And I was like, I don't know. I was like, this isn't me. This is not my tears coming out. And
Mm-hmm.
the noise was like one of, I know that our ancestors used to make. It's called the tangi. Um, when they're grieving, when somebody's passed away. And I felt like it was that intergenerational trauma coming out because I thought like, well, yeah, that makes sense because in times of devastation, they don't have time to grieve.
Mm-hmm.
It's time to like pull your socks up and carry on because that's their only choice in those moments. So there was that. So anyway, then I like figure out that like I can take this pathway. And it was like I started in the end, like I had to map it out. I had to get permission to ride over land. I learned other family stories. I learned how many people feel disconnected because their whānau, their families were also displaced in this eruption. And so yeah, anyway, in November last year, I rode my horse, and my dad and my daughter swapped in and out, and we rode 3 days from where the crater is in the mountain. We rode around the farmland, up the mountain,
Mm-hmm.
down to the other side, and yeah, followed the journey that he took all the way to the marae where we were called onto the marae, and yeah, it was just so beautiful. And yeah, so that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I thought that was so, it was so fun to watch and it was so fun to understand like what was going on. And I was like, oh, that is such a rad thing to be able to dive into and then go redo. Like that, how fun and so fun that you got to do it with your dad and your daughter, which is even more fun.
Yeah, it was really neat, and part of the process. So uh on my chin is our ancestral markings, the moko kauai. And I received this. I'm the first person in my family to receive the moko kauai in 4 generations, because again, it was kind of lost.
Hmm.
Uh, and so I received my moko kauai 3 days before we
Hmm.
rode out, and that was so special. So this the moko kauai is only worn by women, and the kaita, the tā moko artist, he was like, you just have to trust me, and like it comes through.
Hmm.
And so afterwards I said to him like, oh, what is the meaning of my moko kauai? And he said to me, oh, it's kind of like the weaving of your journey. So we have weavers that use flax. And I was like, oh my God, no way. Because Irita Ratana, our great great grandmother, she was the last one to wear it. And she was a very high up weaver. And so
Hmm.
I was like, no way, like she's the last one to wear it. And now like you have done this weaving on markings on me. So again, spiritual.
Yeah, that's so it's so much better when you just allow whatever needs to come through and it's always right. So it's so
Yeah,
fun that you had to fully surrender to that entire process and that it turned out that way is kind of it's very cool.
yeah.
How do you feel like this is a question I keep asking everybody. What do you feel like you wish if you had a magic wand would change in the horse industry like the most? I know there's probably everyone has several things, but what's the one thing that you're like, oh, if this would shift for people, this would make me feel so great.
My question at the moment is how can we indigenize our work with horses?
Mhm.
Because we all come from somewhere, and like when we look back, I think it gives us really beautiful tohu signs that can lead us forward in the future. Whether they're things that we're like, oh, that's something that I don't want to do, or it's something that feels beautiful and connected to everything. So that's my question at the moment,
Hmm.
and I wish that for everybody, wherever they come from, how can I indigenize the work that I'm doing? And to
Hmm.
do that, we have to find out who we are and where we come from.
I know, and I think about all of the different nationalities that I am, and my grandma was Japanese. And then on my grandfather's side, there was Native American. And then when you go to, and it's just like there's so many like little, like I'm such a mutt that it's like, well, where do I go
Beautiful.
first? Um, and so yeah, for the people that are searching for that question, I feel like there's some that makes sense generationally. I mean, I don't know, most people might understand the way that generational trauma is passed down. Maybe they don't, but how to share for anyone out there listening, you're like, I used to hear that and I'd be like, generational trauma, yeah, like sure.
Mm,
But in fact, your egg exists in your great grandmother's egg and inside her. And so and to your grandmother and to your mother and to you. So
mm,
everything that I believe it goes back to the great grandma or further now. Everything that nervous system of that person experienced is your nervous system experiencing it. So when people don't
Mm,
understand, like, why am I so upset? Why do I feel so disconnected? Why do I feel so much grief? Like, why do I? Because those are all things you've already experienced, whether you know it or not. And
yeah.
so I believe when you're handed the gift of being the cycle breaker or the one who has the awareness enough or enough discomfort where you're like, wait a minute, I not living like this.
Yeah.
To break that pattern, it's helpful to understand why you would even feel so strongly about so many of those things. And I think if you're wanting to come at it from like a scientific standpoint, it's helpful for people to be like, oh, that makes sense,
Yeah.
because I feel like once I dove into that, I was like, my mind was blown and I was like, this makes so many things, come together for me. Um,
Mm,
so yeah, I think that's so huge for people to understand that.
It's an important piece, eh? And so, yeah, like you say, powerful when you learn about who they were, then you can kind of go like, oh, yeah, into that thing of like, for example, for myself, of realizing like my grandmother was beaten for speaking her native language. Oh,
Mm,
that's why I don't have my language. That's why I feel so much shame around not being able to speak the language. That's why I cry and it's actually, this is really interesting. A few years ago, I was at a big like equine festival here in New Zealand, and I can remember feeling like I was around a group of men and Caucasian men, and I had this like overwhelming feeling of being small and dirty. And
mm.
I was like, "Jeez, like, why am I feeling this?" And this was like well before this journey. And then, like, while I was on this journey of learning about the trauma that my ancestors experienced, then I'm like, that's why I felt that around
Mhm.
those people, because that's what they felt. And now, like, what are the things that I can do to heal that so that I can stand there in front of those people and take up space and
Mhm.
not feel small and dirty
Mhm.
and I'm like, I would have not found, I would have not, I would have been searching, like, oh my gosh, like, what is the thing? What does my child self need to learn?
Yeah, I think that that piece is Shaylee and I just got off of a workshop and it was all around awareness and like understanding, what is your story versus what is your ancestor's story versus what is the story from the conditioning you've just had. But I feel like those patterns get passed down through generation to generation, regardless of what you do in this lifetime. Like this is so random and interesting that I had a situation come up and we've been talking about the patterns of my relationships and how every relationship I've been in, there has been betrayal, which is so fascinating because some people go their entire life and never get cheated on. And I'm like, well, like, what's wrong with me? Like, and so you want to go to yourself and
Yeah.
then you stop yourself because you're like, that's not a thing. Like, let's
Mm,
evolve beyond this because that question I've been asking myself for however many years is not creating any answers that are solving this issue or breaking this
mm,
pattern. And something came up. Um, it was something around the betrayal wound, and I'm with somebody who would not do that. And so it came up, and he's very safe, and I could say all those things. But it's interesting because before I said something, I was going into my like unhealed, unhinged, this is what I want to do, telling Shaylee,
mm.
like, the crazy part of me wants to like go and drive and be like, see, I knew it, and like prove myself
Yeah.
right. And I was like, but then, so what instead that I'm going to do is I'm going to go on YouTube and I'm going to find how do I clear my betrayal wound meditation. I'm going to do
Mm,
that first. And so we laughed. And then I actually did this, like, it was only like 15 minutes. And it took you back in these steps. And it went directly back to my grandmother, who, when she was young, was sold as a slave to a family over into Hawaii. And I was on the couch with her and it was getting dark and the rats would come up and bite at her at night and she was alone. And I was like, oh my gosh, that deep betrayal wound stems from her own mother, leaving the family, and I was like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, like this isn't even mine. I've been carrying this through every relationship I've ever had. And it's just been like screaming, like, can you look at me now? But what about now? Can you acknowledge this now? So
Yeah.
so it's like the importance of like having the awareness of like if you're seeing these patterns, it's like it doesn't necessarily mean it's karmic or there's something you've done or a decision you've made that's created this. It's like sometimes that stuff is coming through you to be acknowledged and to be healed because you are the one that can handle it. Sometimes it
Mm.
takes a little while, but like that piece of healing the lineage in that way where it goes forward and back, like it's such
Mm.
an important part of the work. And I feel like there's so many people here right now on the planet that are here to do just that with the way that the environment is in general, whether it's the horse world or the people world. It's like kind of crazy everywhere. And I feel like that is what is being poked at people. And the invitation is there to kind of like, wait a minute, is this even mine? Like, I've been
Yeah.
carrying it my whole life, but I don't know if it's actually mine. So,
Yeah. Yeah. What a neat invitation. And I suppose it's conversations like this that bring awareness to it, hey, so that people can take a deeper look rather than feeling disempowered because they don't know what to do. They don't have the
mhm,
tools and I know like speaking to somebody recently, they're like, logically, I know like that's not the thing that I want to do, but I still continue to be triggered in
mhm,
it. And so this feeling of frustration of like, I don't want to be showing up like this, but I don't know what to do about it.
mhm.
So yeah, cool. So cool having that awareness.
Yeah,
Choosing something different.
I know. I think that's what's so cool about all the presenters at the alchemy event is that everybody has like their own version of this in some way, shape, or form. And like everybody is so real and everyone's so in the work and everybody still, even when they're having their own human experience and the struggles and the good stuff and the, everything in between just to get there, they're still able to go show up and do life. And be vulnerable about what they are in their journey and everyone's so humble. I just love that for everyone. I just love how everybody was like, oh,
Yeah.
wait, me with that? I'm like, yeah, I'm like, what? Like my favorite part for everybody that gets to meet you guys that doesn't know you guys, that gets to meet you in real life. I'm like, no, you don't understand how cool it is to be around people, especially women. And Celeste and I kind of talked about this the other day where you're not in competition. Everyone knows that everyone has their own medicine to bring, and whether or not it's the same or mildly different, it's what someone's going to need to hear, and it's going to have to come from you as an individual. Like there is no comparison between that, and I think every one of you guys embodies that. And I just love that for the event.
Mm. Yeah, so beautiful. And yeah, I'm so grateful that you invited me
It
along and um, it's going to be so much fun.
is. Is there anything else that you feel like is you have a burning desire to share?
Mm. Um, is there anything I want to share? Yeah, I suppose I was thinking like it's interesting because we haven't spoken about horses a lot
Oh,
in this conversation, and I think that's the thing that I'm really loving is that when we lean into doing the work on ourselves, then the horse part it just happens easily,
hmm,
and that's the fun of it all. And yeah, it's just cool because even though when I'm sitting in um at the moment I'm studying Te Reo Māori, the Māori language, and it's a full immersion every day type of thing.
hmm,
Um, when I'm sitting in that class, I'm also working on, even though I'm not physically with my horse, I know that I'm working on my relationship with the horses because tomorrow or that afternoon when I show up to my horses, I've worked on a little bit more of me. So um, it's that knowing that just because I'm not there physically with my horse, we're still improving.
Hmm.
And I think that can be a hard thing sometimes. I can remember some years ago, um, somebody saying to me, like, I just don't have the time to do that work. And I'm like, no, but this is the priority because if you work on this piece, then when you go out to go and jump a Grand Prix show jumping course or ride the dressage moves, imagine how beautiful it's going to be because you've worked on the you part.
Yeah, they definitely feel the shift. And I feel like if you think about everything that anyone wants to do, whether it's performance or pleasure or just hang out with their horse, it's like I don't feel like a lot of people in this community are takers in any way. They're all very much givers. And I think the hardest thing for people in this community, the people that follow all of us, is more in the realm of trying to learn how to receive. And and if we can't be in the receiving mode, then we sure shouldn't be asking our horses to be in the receiving mode. We're asking them to become vulnerable and to allow us to manipulate their bodies and to ask them questions and to do all these things when we are ourselves either avoid that or don't like the way it feels or, are kind of
Yeah.
skirting around it. And I'm like, how is that an integrity? Like, you must be able to understand at that same visceral level what it feels like to have somebody put their hands on you, to have somebody not ask permission, to have somebody, can you bend this way and can you keep it there and can you give me more? Can you give me more? It's like until you've experienced that, I don't know how you can be deeply empathetic and expect them to say, yeah, I can actually say yes to that question
Mhm.
because you're waiting for my answer instead of telling me what my answer is, which I feel like is the most of horsemanship world sometimes. So
Yes,
yeah.
we like consent.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for hanging out. I know you have a lot going on, but I'm so
Really.
excited to be able to hang out with you and hug you in person in October. I I can't
Yeah.
wait for you all to meet.
Yeah, not long now at all. I want to tell everyone, like, oh my gosh, I get to hang out with all these amazing people.
Oh, it's so fun.
Yeah,
So fun. So
very
fun.
great.
Well,
Yeah,
cool. Thank you very much. And we will see you in October.